And then I'm just going to announce in a second when we're live. Hi, this is Andy Port. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Newburyport. This is a Zoom meeting that the City of Newburyport is holding for the Newburyport Historical Commission. There is a raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen, so if anybody has comments to make later in the meeting, as you can see on the screen, you'll want to use that tool. And with that, I'll leave it to the Chair of the Commission.
Thank you, Andy. This is Glenn Richards speaking. Welcome to the excuse me, May 28th, 2020 meeting, public meeting of the Newburyport Historical Commission. Present at the meeting, we have, besides Andy Port and planner Caitlin Sullivan and myself, Commissioners Patricia Pecknick, Ron Zimba, Christopher Fay, Joe Morgan, and Peter McNamee. And we're hoping that our other last Commissioner, Malcolm, will be joining us soon. But we do have a quorum without Malcolm, so we will continue with the meeting. As this is an online meeting, by now many of you are already familiar with the protocols. There will probably be a public hearing part of this meeting on the main matter on the agenda. So if you would like to, you'll hear me open the open the window, shall we say, for public comment. And if you'd like to make a comment, use the raise hand feature on the Zoom meeting so that we know you want to make a public comment. And Andy will manage the unmuting you so you can speak, because attendees are by default muted all the time. And also remember that your hand doesn't go down automatically like it would in real life. So do remember to lower the hand once you've been recognized or have spoken, so that we know that you're finished. Thanks for that. And as per always in public hearings, just identify yourself and then give your comment. The identify yourself also goes for members of the commission as well, and I will try my best to make sure it's clear who is speaking, who is making motions, who is seconding motions, and so on, so that everyone, both the commissioners, the members of the public, and our note taker will be clear as to who is saying what. In addition to the commissioners presenting for 342 Merrimack Street are David Curie and attorney Lisa Mead, representing the owners. So we'll get to that agenda item. It's the primary one. We'll get to that in just a minute or two. A couple of quick announcements. The planning board and Councilor Jared Eigenman have been reviewing at my request, actually, and the request of the commission, have been reviewing the ordinance and exactly how we should proceed to make sure we're fulfilling the ordinances correctly and executing them correctly. So they're going to go over that with the commission at our next meeting on June 11th. So, but in the meantime, you know, I've had discussions with them to clarify exactly what the protocol is. And so hopefully we'll be able to follow that correctly. Not hopefully, we will follow it correctly this evening, I'm confident. Second note is that there was an item that was accidentally left off tonight's agenda. That was 3-5 School Street, otherwise known as the Garrison House. That one was at the last meeting continued to this meeting, but it didn't get put on the agenda and publicly noticed and all that. And the attorney for that on that project has agreed to let us continue it to the next meeting, which is what, June 11th, I believe, right? Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so those are all the announcements I have. Andy, unless you had anything else, we can continue with the first major item on the agenda.
Sure, thank you. So I think we have Lisa Mead and David Curie to present that project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Port, if you could put up our PowerPoint presentation, that would be helpful, I think, for everyone. Lisa Mead, Kellerman Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport, on behalf of the applicants, Dan and Judith Lynch. And with me this evening is David Curie, who's the architect on the project. Let me just say that Dan and Judith Lynch have lived in Newburyport for a while, but prior to moving to Newburyport, they lived in Connecticut, where they restored a 1791 house, and it was the home of Cato Freeman, who was the first free African-American in the state of Connecticut. So they are not unfamiliar with the restoration of historic structures. Some of you may have heard this on the original presentation, but most of you were not on the board or commission in July 2018. So I wanted to remind you of that discussion. In July of, and let me tell you why we're here actually. We're here seeking the approval of a preservation plan for the house at 342 Merrimack Street, and also a partial demolition approval. This all arrives out of the desire for the Lynches to restore the house to a single family use, and then do restoration work on it, and then build a single family home at the back of the property facing Merrimack Court, which is consistent with the former street line that exists in Merrimack Court in and around when this house originally was constructed. So in 2018, we actually initially came to the Historic Commission that the Lynches had engaged Eric Dray of Eric Dray Consulting, who is a historic preservationist and architect. And he did extensive research on the house. He worked with Mass Historic to update and amend the Form B, which they did. And Mass Historic said that they believe the house qualified for a preservation restriction, A, given its style, B, the lineage, and C, that it was in the historic district. So at that time, we came to the commission to say, would you be interested in having a preservation restriction on this property, one that would last in perpetuity? And at that time, Sarah White moved and informed the planning board that the historical commission would accept the placement of a preservation restriction on the property or on the house. Steve Dodge at the time was on the board. He seconded it, and it was unanimously approved. We then went to the planning board to have a preliminary review with them. They requested us to move around the proposed second structure in the back, which we did. And in doing so, it required us to get a dimensional variance. We did get a dimensional variance. Then we went back to the planning board to commence our actual 6C special permit process. We opened that meeting with the planning board in June, not in June, in May, and it was continued to June 3rd. And we opened it because we wanted to make sure that we had done what they wanted us to do with the second house. They had some changes regarding the driveway and landscaping and things like that. But we knew we needed to come back here before we closed out with the planning board related to the actual preservation of the 342 Merrimack Street, given a number of additions that have occurred to that house over the years. At the time when we talked to the board and to the commission in 2018, there was some question about which style was going to result from what we were proposing to restore. So Andy, if you could move to the second page. So this is a federal style residence constructed in 1785 by Jacob Whitmore. It's known as the Jacob Whitmore House. It's historically a single family house. It's currently used as a two-family residence. It was converted in 1989. It was purchased by John Currier in 1840. John Currier, as many of you know, had a shipyard down there and created a number of significant ships for the city of Newburyport and held a number of significant positions. I went through this in great detail in my submission. Previously, we gave you some of the detail now, but there's no question in that the house has significant history of Newburyport. And if you could move to the next slide. So here's our proposed site plan. I just kind of wanted you to know there's about an 8-foot elevation difference between Merrimack Street and Merrimack Court. And so the house at the back, single family home facing Merrimack Court, has to be and is subservient, so to speak, to the Whitmore house. But our focus this evening is how we're going to restore the Whitmore house and what are those details, and can we remove a couple of the pieces that David is suggesting that we remove. So Dave, if you go to the next slide, Andy, please. So here's the front of the Whitmore house. I think this is a very, many people know this house, particularly because of this kind of appendage that was added on to the front sunroom, if you will, over the front porch. It's not really a portico. So that's the front of the house. And you could go to the next slide, Andy. Here's a different view of the front of the house, so you can see where that is. You can see the side of the house there and that with the garage out back. Nothing's happening to that garage. If you could go to the next slide, Andy. This is really the better view, because this, and in a minute, you'll see what we're proposing to remove. But this is an upper deck, a lower deck, a secondary means of egress, a bunch of pressure treated wood, all hiding the back of that house. So if you go to the next slide. So what we're proposing to do, and I'll have David go through this in detail in a minute, is updated in the mid 19th century, which was when it was done, originally updated. The second floor bay was added in the early 20th century. That's that bay out front. Two-story L extended at the rear of the house post 1924, according to a review of the 1880 bird's eye view in the 1924 assessor's map. And the rear shed dormer was added in 1980. So we don't know exactly when that two-story L was added in the back. It was definitely added post 1924. But we don't have a building permit for it. And so we do need to come talk to you about that. And then the rear shed dormer. So our proposal is to, well, let me also first say that the house, all of the windows in the house, except for the side lights on the front door and the transom on the side door, are Brosco-ish windows, 1970 to 1980. They all have springs inside of them. So none of the windows are original to the house except for the ones that I just mentioned. The proposal is to restore the existing residence to its historically single-family use, preserve the current, the preservation of the two-family use would be by adding that second structure in the back. And then we're seeking the 6C special permit from the planning board. So Andy, if you go to the next slide. So we're proposing to remove that front added sunroom, if you will, portico, second floor bay, and to demolish the two-story L at the rear of the residence. And that's what the demolition, partial demolition request is for. So we would note that that was the proposal to remove that bay window was made in 2018. So Andy, if you go to the next one. So the proposal will be to construct a one-story kitchen at the rear of the structure and construct a second-story deck above the first-story addition. And with that, I'm going to let David go through the architectural plans, which will start on the next slide, please. David?
David, you're muted if you happen to.
I now believe I'm not muted. Is that correct?
You are.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yes. Thank you. I'm David Keary, Keary Design. Dan and Judy Lynch hired me to help them rework the plans to create a one family living at the home rather than a two family. And so in working out our plans for Dan and Judy, I understood that the Historic Commission had requested or preferred that the front bay be removed, the two-story piece. So that was kind of a given. It had no real impact on their plans for the interior. But that was understood from the beginning. So the only thing was the replacement of windows and doors in the front there as to whether, and I'm sure that that's one of the things that we'll be reviewing tonight. The other demolition that we came up with as we were going through the plans is the shed structure off of the L at the rear of the building was quite dilapidated and did not, I think, would be not deemed historically significant. And the two-story deck and stairway being the same, that we would remove those. And so on the upper, reviewing the drawing here, you can see the upper left where we're proposing to remove just the shed structure to the right, and the pressure treated deck as well, and stairway from that used as a second means of egress. In doing that, we have a bump out, and you'll see that in the next drawing, but I'll continue on demo, where that existing deck is. We were proposing to add a space for a kitchen on the first floor and bring that out off the main building as a one-story structure with a deck above it. On the right-hand drawing, you can see, right-hand top, you can see the front piece being removed, and the deck to the right being removed, and the shed structure behind it being removed. Also note we have dotted windows and doors, and I'm sure this will be something that we'll review this evening, that we were proposing to remove, replace in a different configuration. So on this one, you do see there's a doorway there that it was preferred by Dan and Judy to do a different arrangement there because the door was not needed for their plan. But and we'll talk about that a little on the next, when we get to the proposed. And then the lower left-hand portion of the drawing, once again, shows the shed being removed in the rear. There's one window there as well. That this is the driveway side of the home, and there's really no entry from there that's convenient to the driveway. So you'll see in the next drawing that we're proposing a door there to a mudroom. And then on the front of that, obviously again the front bay being removed, and back to the front shows the front bay being removed. Door and side lights were to be removed. We've had some discussion and understand that there are two original pieces there, and that's those side lights. So we can talk about that as we get further on. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. So we might as well start on the rear, upper left-hand corner. That is the proposed kitchen coming out with the 3 windows and a deck above it. There's no need for a stairway down there now. And the gable of the L is to be, Dan would like to replicate the trim exactly as it is on the rest of the home, on the corners and the gable. There's a new window configuration above. Chimneys are staying. That window is to the left of an existing old chimney, which they like and will keep. And there's a new doorway there on the lower left part of that gable. That's it on that. And to the right of it, we see the other side. This is where that door was, that was the side entry. There are 3 windows there now. That's a kitchen counter right now, which is why that was being removed. To the right of that is the new addition as part of the kitchen with the deck above it. And you can see the gable beyond with the new trim matching the existing corner boards. On the driveway side, again, you can see now, rather than the shed structure off of the back, you can see just beyond it to where the kitchen bumps out and the deck above it bumps out, and a little entry with a bracketed entryway, new corner board, and a new doorway as a mudroom entry. And then finally, on the front, we have a new doorway, transoms, and transom and side lights trimmed with new trim configuration there around the door, and a new window arrangement above it. And that's it. In terms of details, I'm sure you all will have lots of questions and we can talk about those. I did put some notes on, but if there are more questions about those, we'd be happy to answer them. There's, I think, I've worked with a fair number of people in town, and Dan and Judy really are historically minded and want to do right by the house. And therefore, we're here for that review tonight. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, David. So that ends our presentation. And so now we'd love to have a discussion with the commission and receive their feedback and comments.
Okay, well, there is basically the item on the floor is this, demo delay application. And so there are a couple of requirements on that, and we will get to that discussion, Attorney Mead. We've been basically following the correct procedure, but a little bit somewhat loosely, but I want to see if we can follow it a little bit more accurately. And that what we used to call step one was determining whether the structure is historically significant. I don't think there's going to be too much controversy about that particular decision. And we used to have, step two was the demolition plan review. So those are statutory requirements, and those are still present. That's why tonight's meeting is publicly notified for, for that demolition plan review. It requires a public hearing and all that. The demolition plan review is only required if the Historical Commission first decides that the structure is historically significant and should be considered for preservation. So that's the first decision we have to make. So we'll tackle that first. But since you've already kind of gone through a lot of what we would cover in the demo plan review, which is fine. So we won't have to go through it again, and that's perfectly okay. I would like to point out one thing, which is sort of good news for your client, Attorney Mead, which is that shed portion, I'm informed by our Jennifer Blanchet, our zoning administrator, enforcement officer, that because of its age and so on, you don't need our approval or either way to that particular part of demolition. So even if we, no matter what we decide, if we decide it's historically significant and preferably preserved, we don't have the authority to impose a delay on that particular piece. So that's in the bag, so to speak.
Great.
All right. So it's mainly the other things. So what I want to do first is we will get to public. Well, first we have to make that call. But before we entertain that motion or anything, I do want to allow my fellow commissioners to ask any clarifying questions. I know I had one or two myself, but let me first turn to my fellow commissioners here and ask them if they have any questions they would like to ask either you, Attorney Mead, or the architect, Mr. Keary, to clarify. You should all be unmuted so you can just speak up and just identify yourself.
This is Patricia. I would just like to ask, since the word, we're talking about a restoration, but then the word preservation has also been used. Since under demo delay, this commission has to look at the standards, and also since for any PR, the Mass Historical will require that the standards be referenced, I just want to clarify, is it the restoration standards that are being referenced in the application?
Thank you, Ms. Petnick. So the PR absolutely references the standards, and it would be the restoration standards.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else on the commission have a question? Yep. Ron, I think I see you.
Yes, this is Ron. I'd like to just to confirm that what I see here in the plans are two different additions in the back. Is that correct? And
yes, there was the original L that you can see the cable on in this photo, and then there was like a shed added on, a two-story shed added on to the back of that, which is what we're proposing to remove.
Okay, but the other addition will remain.
Stays. That's correct. That's the gable end that you see in there right now on this plan. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So to clarify, and I think you raise a good point. And as a result of what the chair has said, the only thing for the demolition that would be considered the change of the roof line would be that front portico.
Yes.
That would be it. Mr. Chair, if I could, maybe, I'm not sure how many preservation restrictions the commission has done. And maybe I could just talk about that process for a minute that has historically happened.
I would prefer to defer that particular conversation till I don't want to muddy the waters on our initial decision as to whether it's historically significant and preserved or not. But I would be happy to get to that discussion a little, at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the commission? Any questions? And by the way, I see Malcolm Carnwath has joined us, so that's good to have you, Malcolm, so everyone's here. If not, or while you're thinking about it, I had a couple quick questions. First of all, for Attorney Mead, for those who might not be familiar, could you just give a very brief explanation of that 6C, what exactly that is? I have a somewhat vague understanding of it myself, just so we understand, the context of, because I think it relates to the whole reason for wanting a PR and all that.
Sure. So under the zoning ordinance in Newburyport, you're only allowed to have one residential structure on a lot. It could be a multifamily structure, or two-family, or single-family. But if you want more than one residential structure on a lot, you have to have a special permit under Section 6C. And so, and there's some criteria that you have to meet. But the biggest criteria is the following. You have to provide a benefit to the city. A, preservation of open space, B, provision of affordable housing, or C, historic preservation. And so because this house was a two-family already, even though it was originally built as a single, the use was already illegal on the lot, and we are just trying to separate the use into two separate structures. And so therefore it requires a 6C. To show that we are doing historic preservation, which is why we originally came to the Historic Commission. The commission would have to be willing to hold it. Mass Historic would have to be willing to accept it too.
Okay, thank you for that. And it sounded like you said the two-family use was illegal, but I think you meant it is legally a two-family.
Legal. Yeah, no,
yes.
Legal.
Yes, thank you. I believe it was Mr. Curie said that the NHC wanted that front bay removed, that was suggested by the Historical Commission. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so when we had the conversation originally with the Historic Commission, nobody voted but the minutes will reflect that they were hoping that that front bay would come off to restore the original front of the house pre-addition. So there was a preference expressed for that. Malcolm, I believe, might have been at that meeting. I don't think anybody else, maybe Chris. No, excuse me, maybe.
I think I was there. This is Ron. I was there.
Ron. I think you were there too. Yes. Maybe Ron and Malcolm were at that meeting, but there was a discussion, and the preference was expressed by Mr. Dodge and Sarah and other members that come off.
Okay, interesting. I would love to hear from I believe I was at that meeting as well. I would love to hear if the applicant has any feelings pro or con, because, if we take a second look at that, and we'll discuss that more a little bit later. I'd love to know what the applicant's views are, if they have any preference themselves for whether to keep it or remove it.
Well, why don't I reach out to them while you continue discussing?
Yeah. Okay. I think I just had one other question on the plans. It looked like showing it was the plan, or excuse me, it was an elevation showing the side opposite the driveway, and it had kitchen, yes, this one, and you can see in the upper right, that section there, that kind of group of 3 windows toward the back, and then also in the addition, both labeled for kitchen. So is that just a very big kitchen, or is that something else?
That's all the kitchen. David, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is a big open kitchen / eating area. There's a little settee, kind of an area, and a bar.
Okay.
Along that window.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you I think those are the only clarifying things I had. It's a good presentation and well prepared, so we appreciate that. I could also quickly comment on, if the owners are on the call, that we do appreciate their interest in historic preservation, and we always love to see that. Okay. Yes.
I just had an exchange with the owners. It's their preference to remove that portico.
Okay. Just make a note of that. Okay. So the commission needs to decide if this particular structure is historically significant and should be considered for preservation. And I think the phrase they use is preferably preserved. So would anyone care to make a motion, or does anyone have any comments on that prior to making a motion?
I'll motion that I think it is historically.
And I believe that was Malcolm, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so Malcolm, are you, I want to combine it to one motion. You're saying, it sounded like you said you're a little, your audio is a little weak, but it sounded like you said your motion is that it is historically significant. Does that also include historically significant and preferably preserved or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the motion, just to clarify, so everyone understands, the motion is that the structure be deemed historically significant and preferably preserved. Is there a second?
Second.
That sounded like Ron.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. So the motion, so the way we've been doing this in these online meetings is I'll do a roll call so we can get everyone's vote. So Ron, you were the last to speak. Your vote on that? Yes.
Yes.
Or no? Okay.
Yeah.
You approve. Okay. Malcolm?
Yeah.
You're yes. Patricia?
Yes.
Okay. Christopher Fay?
Yes.
Okay. Peter McNamee?
Yes.
Thank you. Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Okay. And is that everybody? Who did I miss? I think that's everybody except me. Oh, and me. And I'll vote yes as well. Okay. So that that decision being made, what the ordinance then calls for is the demolition plan review. As I said a few minutes ago, we've kind of already started that. But there is opportunity for public comment in this phase. So I'll remind, thank you, Andy, for showing us again. So I'll remind folks again, if there are people attending this call or / meeting that would like to make a public comment regarding the demolition plan, and given the whole circumstances of this, if there was something that wasn't clear to a member of the public and you want to ask, and your comment involves a question for the presenters, I think that would be okay as well. So please do raise your hand, any member of the public that would like to speak, and we'll give a few minutes or a minute or two for that to happen.
Okay, the first in the audience, we have Stephanie Nikotic.
Okay, Ms. Nikitish, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. As Attorney Mead has said, this project involves significant zoning relief, both a dimensional variance and a 6C permit, with a perpetual preservation restriction as a required public benefit. The MHC earlier wrote that the building qualifies for a perpetual PR after reviewing its current condition as documented in the Form B. So in your input on the plans and determination of conditions for demo delay release, I hope you will keep in mind that alterations the MHC might find unacceptable could put the PR and so the public benefit at risk. These are my concerns about the plans. So the window sash, I've heard this is a restoration, and Attorney Mead has said none of the windows are historical. I will hope that the NHC will confirm that, that's true. But what I would say, if window sash cannot be repaired, if wooden window sash cannot be repaired, or if you agree all windows should be returned to a 6/6 configuration, then replacement should be with all wood, true divided light sash. There are resources for true and kind replacements, and I'm happy to send those I know of to the planning office. Regarding window frames, The Form B notes the existing window frames reflect the recessed panel detail of the corner pilasters. It is important that they be retained. The front bay addition. If you agree to this removal, please require that the new window above the door is accurate for the building before the addition was made. It was most likely a single window, matching those on either side of it, centered above the door. The new window should be all wood, true divided light, with a frame which has been milled to match the existing frames. I did consult with Tom Coulterjohn of Newburyport Preservation Trust, in particular about this and other things, and he agrees. I believe that Mr. Coulterjohn is actually in the audience, but technically not able to speak. Regarding doors, is the removal and replacement of doors really necessary? Has the age and condition of the existing front door and trim been examined? Is the replacement in the plans appropriate and based on documentation? Regarding the front door and trim, I also consulted with Mr. Coulterjohn. He recommends the NHC look at this and determine its age. He believes this entrance is early and within the Greek Revival timeframe mentioned in the Form B. The window lights are clearly old, as can be seen from the wavy glass. He believes this feature should be retained. And if the bay is removed, then an appropriate entablature above the doorway is recreated based on the many local examples available. He also believes that the door on the east elevation is historically important and should not be removed. Regarding new window openings and placement, are they appropriate? Regarding the chimney, although a center chimney is shown in the plans, it is not written anywhere that the existing chimney will be retained. Please make this a condition. Again, in consultation with Tom Coulterjohn, replacing this with a fake chimney, as is increasingly done in Newburyport, would not be in keeping with the Secretary standards or the promised public benefit. If any repairs to the masonry are needed, they should be done with lime mortar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nikitich. And one question, you mentioned old wavy glass, and I was trying to determine that myself. Did you, how did you determine that there was old glass? Did you or Mr. Coulterjohn or anyone make a?
Yes, Mr. Coulterjohn visited without going onto the property, which is not, you know, right. But this property is very close to the street, right. Again, which makes the windows an extremely important and doors extremely important to its authenticity. Mm-hmm. So he could see from the street, he could see the side lights on the front door. He took a picture and he said, this is wavy glass. This is the old glass, which is, you know, a real hallmark of historic glazing in Newburyport. So that was what I understood. He sent me the pictures and he made that comment.
Okay, so is it just the side lights in the front entrance then that were determined to be old glass?
That's what he mentioned to me. I think okay. What overall, I think the request is that the Historical Commission examine all of these right. features that are proposed to be replaced right. to understand you know, what they are and what value they might have.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Nikitich. Is that it?
Yes, thank you. I will endeavor to lower my head.
Very good. We appreciate that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, is that Attorney Mead speaking?
Yeah, it is. I wanted to just reply to some of Stephanie's comments, which is in her initial comment is why I wanted to talk a little bit earlier about the process for the preservation restriction, mm-hmm. Because she raises a really good point. We purposefully engaged Mass Historic early on this so that they knew about what we were doing. We want to make sure that the commission is on board with whatever it is that we end up doing after we meet with the commission. This is a collaborative process here. And so we would take whatever it is that we end up agreeing with the commission on and then also get Mass Historic's approval of it too. So, you know, we have to have this preservation restriction. We can't move forward without making sure everybody's on board. This isn't something we're going to get and then go to the planning board, get the planning board approval, and then hope Mass Historic says yes, because then we won't be able to do the house. So it is a iterative process, and we're happy to make sure that that happens, because we have to. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I mentioned in my early commentary that the windows on the side lights on the front door are original, and the windows on the transom on the side door are original as well. So there's no doubt about that, and we're very clear about that. The applicant would welcome the commission to come out and look at these things so they can see for themselves what it is. And I think that Stephanie makes some good points about the windows. For example, the replacement window over the door if the portico is removed. Mr. and Mrs. Lynch, Mr. Lynch in particular, is a woodworker, and he wants to make sure that the trim and everything matches what it's supposed to match in a period, and do what it's supposed to do. So they don't have a problem with you coming out and looking at it. Similarly, there's nothing happening to the chimney, and that's why there's no comment on it. So we're happy to add a comment that says original chimney to stay. The reason we're here is to pick up on these kinds of details. And I just want to make that really clear, is the kind of things being thrown that as if something was happening anyway. That's the point of it.
Okay. All right, thank you, Ms. Mead. Okay, we have, well, first let's check in, make sure I see, the only hand I still see up is Ms. Nikatish, seems to still have her hand up, but as, oh, it's down. Okay, is anyone else in the public over there? There's only a few other people there, and I'm not seeing any hands. So.
None noted at this time, Chair.
Yeah, I'm thinking, why don't we go ahead to our fellow commissioners? And I think where I'd like to start is my Vice Chair, Patricia Pegnick, took some photos of both this property and comparable ones that she did some very interesting research into the nature of that trim and so forth. I won't say much. I'll let her just explain what each slide is, just so you know what we're looking at. And I think I'll reserve my comments till after we've seen it. But it's an interesting house, and it definitely has some interesting, what the realtors would call eclectic features. So Patricia, you want to go ahead and explain what we're looking at?
Yeah, so knowing that some members of the commission are not necessarily doing site visits during the pandemic, and that a whole group of us walking around might have been a little too intrusive, I did want to take the kind of photos that would illustrate some of the exterior features of this house so that anyone who didn't get there can see. And also part of what we do as a commission is, conduct our own research so that we can better understand the house and its context. In this case, we know the owners have worked very hard to plan for the future of this house. So I like the word collaborative that Attorney Mead mentioned. We really want to give our fullest attention to the details so that whatever work we do could inform the decisions that are made. So this first slide is, here's the bay, and we don't know the date of the bay. Right, the Mass Historical revision to the inventory form suggests that, okay, Edward Sawyer may have built the barn during his ownership between 1914 and 1924. Maybe it makes sense to speculate that it was also during that period that the front bay was added, maybe. The Form B says the footprint of the bay appears on the 1924 assessor's map. We don't know. It could have been earlier when the Currier family sold the house after 68 years in 1908. It does say on the original Form B that it's probably an early 20th century addition. There are probably mixed views on whether it contributes to or detracts from the overall historic presentation of the house. And, that's why there's 7 of us. So at the end, I would love to hear, from other commissioners about that, and we can look at the slides again. But I do want you to look at the window trim. The window trim is consistent on the 5 bay windows with the trim on all the rest of the house. It has that square design at the top that looks like a column. Eric Dre's, excellent revised inventory says the windows are set in frames that reflect the recessed panel detail of the corner pilasters. Okay, Andy, could you look at slide 2? Thank you so much.
Yeah,
okay.
And by the way, sorry to interrupt you, Patricia, though, that indentation and the corner pilasters is also shown in those 2 columns that we were just looking at. I noticed that for the first time.
It's so cool.
So anyway, go ahead.
So since when the shed was added in the back, some of the windows must have been removed from the rear elevation, right? It's possible that the 5 windows in the front bay were those, maybe, and that's why the trim matches. And then on slide 3, another look at these windows with this detail. Of course, the house needs to be painted, but don't let it distract you from the beauty of these Greek revival details. Slide 4 is the west elevation. And I want to say to the owners that the barn in the back is very interesting, and we're glad that it's not going to be demoed. The waypoint survey note in the assessor's record correctly listed as a barn. I think it's really interesting. Slide 5 is the east elevation. So the window dimensions are distorted by the fact that, I had a zoom on my camera and I had to resize the photo. But this window on the near right is the exact same dimensions as all the other windows. There's the same trim detail. So this is the window on the right that would be proposed for demo, as well as the door. And then the next slide shows that door, which, like the windows, has this beautiful ornamental detail from the Greek Revival homes that were being built in the mid-19th century. And then slide 7 has these corner pilasters as another mark of that style, these great ornamental details. That Greek Revival style was nationally popular. So I think this is a great example of, the Greek revitalization of an 18th century house. Slide 8 has a close-up of the transom above that east elevation door. You guys were talking about wavy glass, so there you go. Slide 9, okay, so I looked for the same window trim around the shipbuilding district because I hadn't noticed it elsewhere in Newburyport, and that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that I can't find it. So this is actually 293 Merrimack, which was built in 1840, has the same trim. In slide 10, here's another house in that area with the same window trim from 1843. Slide 11, likewise, a mid-19th century Greek revival on Walnut Street from the 1840s. Slide 12, the Form B for this Oakland Street house says 1843. And slide 13, this is neighboring number 2 Merrimack Court. And here you can see not only the same trim, but how the windows must originally have looked on Merrimack with that single window centered. This house, just like 342 Merrimack, is an 18th century house that, according to its Form B, was remodeled in the mid-19th century, adding the projecting central bay with the flanking sidelights. And importantly, this house was once owned by John Currier, who owned 342 Merrimack. Mass Historical said they don't know which house he lived in and which he might have rented out because he owned both. But do you figure maybe that both of his 18th century sort of shipyard adjacent 18th century houses might have been Greek revitalized during the same period? He purchases 342 Merrimack in 1840. So this distinctive window trim and the build dates of the other houses with the trim seem to tell a story. The trim is on some pretty grand houses in that area, and maybe it was once all over Newburyport and has been demoed. I don't know. Maybe it was only here. But to my analysis, it helps us date the sort of Greek revitalization of the house, and certainly the trim, to the 1840s. And you were speaking, Attorney Mead was speaking earlier, as was Stephanie from the Preservation Trust, that the application is to demo the bay and replace it with a series of 3 windows, sort of replicating the window pattern of the existing unknown date front bay. And so maybe we on the commission can share our views in a moment on whether it's more appropriate plan to have those 3 ganged windows and almost restoring it to how the windows look in the bay, or if it's more appropriate to restore it to a single window. Again, that's why there's 7 of us. Slide 14, this has nothing to do with Newburyport, but I was interested in the fact that some Greek Revival houses, people did attempt to have a 2nd story, either opened or enclosed porch, and that maybe that's what was on the minds of whoever put the 2nd story bay in on 342. Slide 15, you know, that's why if somebody were to make an argument that this bay could be from earlier in the 20th century, I mean, I'd listen. I would just I wish we knew exactly the age of it. Slide 16 is the front entry with these recessed panels and the pilasters, and as listed on Form B. And slide 17, I think it's very interesting, right? So the bay in the front is supported by these columns, and it almost looks like the stone pillar was supposed to be some sort of classical plinth. And maybe if you look at slide 18, it made me wonder if there was an earlier, more narrow column that was then replaced with this. The other column, I don't have a picture, but there's some rot at the base of that. So that's sort of some of my observations, and that's all I have to say for now, although not all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we really appreciate that research that you've done on that, Patricia. I had a question. Yeah, and the comment I was going to say, but refrain from saying, you said it as well, Patricia, that there have been a number of houses, my own dwelling included, that underwent varying degrees of updating during the mid 19th century. This is an interesting example because, as we know, Currier he had access to all kinds of building materials and carpenters and everything else. And I'm not sure if he was the same, if the shipbuilding Currier and the builder Currier are the same guy or the same family or what. I know there's buildings, I think City Hall, in fact, the Currier was the contractor for. So in any event, this one, along with some others, has been really kind of converted, and in such a way that it poses that question of, okay, does it make sense to try to undo those changes, or are they now historic in their own right? Which personally I would lean toward, both mainly because of the age, and B, the thoroughgoing nature of the changes they've made. And I know the applicant isn't planning to somehow, try to bring the house back to a federal period house, but mainly, respect its current, let's call it a conversion or whatever you want to call it, into a very nice example of, you can tell from the proportions, the central chimney and so on, that it was originally started as a federal period house and it's now Greek Revival. So anyway, I don't want to monopolize the discussion. I'd like to hear from some of the other commissioners who would have an opinion on any of the above. Oh, come on, guys. I know you must have something to say. I know some of you are muted, like Joe and Christopher, your mics are muted. So if you're trying to say something, you need to unmute yourselves. Peter and Ron, you are unmuted. Any Malcolm, any comments from anybody?
Yeah, I think, Malcolm, it's a nice federal period house it was Greek revivalized. I think if I had my druthers, I'd like to see the original door, the portico taken off, because I don't think it adds, unless it was at a peak roof and had two-story columns. But the original door, as far as the window above, I would like, if it were me, I would have a single window flanked by side lights like on the front door. So in other words, reducing the size of the two flanking windows of the second. But I think it's a really nice house, and those are just some ideas. I like the pilasters on the corner boards and the Greek revival treatments that were done, and that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you, Malcolm. Your audio was a little bit soft, but I think we picked up everything. It sounded like you're saying on the front bay, you don't see that being terribly contributory to the historic value of it. Could probably go and possibly restore the front entrance to what is conjecturally more accurate. But that grouping of the 3 windows above is a bit much. Something a little bit more appropriately scaled, either just a single window or a window with smaller side lights.
Two single side lights, but either side of the main window. That's just an idea,
Okay. Okay. Anyone else like to offer an opinion?
This is Peter McNamee. I'll go along with most everything that Malcolm says with regards to removing the portico. I think it's I think that would do the house a lot of good. The 3 windows, I also think, just looks a little odd. It steals focus in a way that really shouldn't be stolen. There should be some balance between that front doorway and that window. So I'm not entirely along the same lines as Malcolm in saying that take away the 3 windows and just have one flanked by 2 smaller. I think it would be more appropriate to have just the single window, similar to what we saw in the other Currier house.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. And I think I saw hands from Joe Morgan, and someone else had a hand up a minute ago. I think it was Christopher. So Joe, I see your hand up. Why don't you get and speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Richards. I just wanted to add, well, I've got 2 questions really. One regarding the chimney. I know Commissioner Pecknick brought that up in her list of items, and I feel that there's such strong symmetry in this front facade of the building, and I think that's really very deliberate. Clearly, that's a trademark of this federal style building, or even Greek Revival for that matter. But that chimney is a very strong element. I'm not sure what I'm looking at when I see it in a photograph or in this drawing. It looks like, I assume it's masonry, and it's either painted or parged. And I don't know if that's a corrective measure for waterproofing or a leaky chimney, or what the material is there. And I suspect that would also have to be renovated and restored in some fashion, which leads to my bigger question really when I hear Commissioner Pecknick and Attorney Mead speaking about this process of restoration. How does this restoration take place? Is there a professional consultant talking about custom windows, all wood, custom, true divided light windows, all of the particular types of moldings that we're talking about? Who advises in this process when we have a true historical preservation project?
Okay, Attorney Mead or the architect, do you have an answer to that, to either of those questions? I suspect, by the way, the chimney is masonry that's parged, but I'll let them speak to that.
That's correct. So I can speak to that. The parged chimney face is in keeping with what the historical aspect of it is, and it is parged. So that's the answer I've just received from the applicant. As far as the process is concerned, I will tell you what historically the process has been. And, depending on how far this process goes will depend on how far the applicant is willing to go. So what the city has done, and they have progressively gotten better at this, is that if you're going to do a preservation restriction, you have a preservation plan that is approved by the commission, the Mass Historic, and the planning board. And then it is the building inspector and now the zoning code enforcement officer who would be assured that the details on that plan are actually constructed. It was at one time, plans were not detailed, and they were not attached to conditions of decisions and things of that nature. But I think if you look at the Kelly School, the Unitarian Church, you'll see that the details on a number of things were done. Actually, the Unitarian Church wasn't a restoration or anything that was related to something else, but the Kelly School would be a better example. So that's how it's enforced. There's not somebody brought in on it. The city has not to date required that. I think that's a balance that the commission has to start to think about, depend on how much, in addition to the restoration, a person's going to be willing to do to a house, and how much additional cost you layer on top of that for oversight, when you have people that are perfectly capable of doing it with the city. So you detail the specifics of, the clapboards and the molding and the corner boards and the windows and the doors and everything you can. That's why you ask for plans with details on them, right? That's why we have these meetings. If you start to layer other things on, then I think that I think citizens, quite frankly, private land homeowners are going to start to decide whether or not they do, restoration or not restoration. But to date, that's what's happened. So you would approve a plan, we'd get it to a point that it was incredibly detailed, which we need more work on, and that's why we're here. And then Mass Historic has to agree that in fact is the plan and is the restoration. And then you have to build it to it. And it is observed by the building inspector and the zoning code enforcement officer.
So does someone at Mass Historic Society or do they have someone on staff that's knowledgeable about these these details from that particular era and would actually review the plans and critique them?
That would be, I deal with Michael Steinitz, who's the deputy preservation of the director of the preservation planning division. And when we send in our proposed plans and restriction to him to review, I presume they have that staff, because when it comes back, I get lots of detailed comments on it. So that's the process that Massachusetts sets up, and that's the process we have to go through.
Yeah, okay. So this is Glenn speaking. Mike's, yeah, I would agree with what Attorney Mead just said, in the sense that I don't know for a fact who they have on staff or as consultants or whatever, but based on the kinds of things we've gotten back from them, as she points out, they are quite detailed and thorough, and let's put it this way, they show evidence of considerable background and knowledge and all that.
Yeah,
that's great. The reason why I'm just concerned is I think I'm understanding that this process for preservation restriction is a more rigorous process than other ones we've been talking about, Glenn and Patricia. That's why I'm asking. There must be another level of scrutiny involved.
Yes, and Commissioner Morgan, I will tell you that I anticipate that Mass Historic is going to say that the entire exterior envelope or the front and sides of the house have to be protected to meet the requirements for the PR. They're not going to say, oh, great, you're demoing 9 windows, cutting in new windows, altering the dimensions of new windows, taking out 2 historic doors. Okay, now let's put a PR at. That's not how it's going to work.
No, and I get trying to have a conversation here, and I get this the tone of both Stephanie and you, Ms. Petnick, are really, you know, we hear what you're saying, and you know, let me just say to you, for example, we've heard the comments related to the, you know, if in fact the portico is coming off, we heard the comments related to the single window over. We've heard the comments related to the side lights in the front door. We've heard the comments related to the door on the side and the transom over. So we now need an opportunity to figure out how that works, and come back to you depending on what other comments you have.
Yeah.
How we accomplish, you know, and respond to what your comments are.
Yeah, no, I understand, Attorney Mead, but this is why it's important for us and the commission to be able to talk to each other. I was actually addressing my remark to my fellow commissioner. I wasn't directing it to you or the applicant, and this is just kind of my voice, and I'm stuck with it. It's probably the occupational hazard of teaching for 25 years. I know it sounds like I'm lecturing, even when I'm deeply sympathetic or moved to tears, but I definitely was just trying to explain to Mr. Morgan that, you know, this is my opinion of what Mass Historical would say. I would like to return to the discussion between the commissioners, because I would like to introduce a motion to impose the demolition delay and maybe talk about that.
Yes, well, let me just say one quick thing. And first, I have one quick question for Attorney Mead, and that is the house currently occupied?
Yes, the Lynches live there.
Okay, but they are.
And they have a tenant.
Okay, occupied, but they are okay with a site visit.
I believe that they are. I mean, obviously, we're going to all behave and wear masks.
Of course, yeah, we, that.
You know, all those kinds of things, but we could certainly arrange that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So as Ms. Petnick was leading up to, since it's historically significant and perfectly preserved, it's probably I think we're all in agreement, Attorney Mead, that it's going to be a bit of an iterative process, and I view it, and I think we all also view it as not as an adversarial process, but a collaborative process to get to a place where both sides are either equally happy or equally unhappy, either one, with what we've got. But of course, we have the added dimension that it has to be able to pass muster with Mass Historic. So that's kind of what Commissioner Morgan may have been referring to, that extra layer. There is that we don't usually have to deal with that. So I think it's in your best interest to, we can have a motion tonight to impose a demo delay during, so you have that clock ticking anyway, which is probably to your advantage. But that doesn't mean we go away for a year. It means we continue to, we'll set up a date for some subset or whoever on the commission is interested in. I know I am, and I think at least a few others might be interested in actually doing a closer inspection, particularly the windows, so we can, get a better feel for exactly what's what. We might even be able to guess or make a better estimation if we saw how the interior of that bay is set up, if that, if the owner is amenable to that. But we can negotiate all those things. So is that the motion you were preparing to make, Ms. Petnick?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, you want to go ahead and state your motion?
Hey, Glenn.
Yes, I hear a voice. Is that Christopher Fay? Yeah, I thought I saw your hand up before. Did you have something to say, Christopher?
I absolutely did.
Go right ahead.
I've been waiting patiently. So maybe just one thing. I was under the impression we were raising our hands. Is that correct?
Some of you have. Some people have been speaking up, notably me. But yeah, I did see your hand, and then it went down. But I see it up again. So please, why don't you go ahead and make your comment before we have any motion?
Well, the first comment was if we could just stick with that protocol, because that's a little frustrating. Secondly, I'm in agreement with Malcolm, but I have a question for the architect if he's available or if Attorney Mead can communicate with him. And that's
I'm here. This is Dave here.
The proposed 3 windows above the front door.
Sure.
Is that a preference? Is that architecturally?
I'm glad you brought that up. Can I speak?
Yes.
Somebody else was going to speak?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and answer the question, Mr. Curie?
Okay, yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. That is trial number 2. We had done one with a triple to begin with. We actually just, you know how things work in design, you kind of can cut and paste. So the original 3 windows that are in that front bay, in design number 1, we said, well, what would it look like if we did just the 3? And then we thought maybe that's a little too crowded. And then we put the 4/4s flanking. And then we thought, well, maybe we should try something else. And we said, well, let's take it. And it speaks to the collaborative process that I think we'll have here. I think it's a really good discussion to have to alter those. I think my client would agree that he'd be willing to look at a number of things. I like Malcolm's idea very much. Single certainly is maybe the best historically, but it might be nice for you all to see the way the light comes into that beautiful upstairs beautiful stairway. And so for that reason alone, if you were speaking purely from light coming into a building, it might be nice to have more glass, but there's always that balance. So I think that we could collaborate on that and come up with something really nice.
Is there a historic model that these windows are modeled after? In other words, is this consistent with this style of house? I don't know, so that's why I'm asking.
The single, I live up the street in a center entrance Greek Revival, and I have a single in my hallway. It's a different proportion. So it is, I have seen the single before. It just so happened that there was triple on the bay. And, to me, it's the symmetry. And so I guess that's all I can speak to. And to what I see in town, the other examples I've seen in town, which I'm not sure who it was who took those pictures, but that was a nice effort there.
Yeah. Chris, this is Glenn. I'll try to answer your question or provide a little bit more to try to answer your question. Is there historical precedent? What makes this complicated is that if this was a house that was built new in that Greek Revival era, then quite probably it wouldn't just be the single 6/6 in the middle. It very likely could be something more elaborate because they were starting to experiment with some of those forms, and so where this is, we're in the case where you're taking a federal, while it's conjecture, but I think we could be pretty sure it would have been a single window when it was still a federal period house, right? And depending on, whoever's doing that updating, depending on their budget, their access to resources, how far they want to go, they might use the same window opening to save money and just, either replace it with a 1/1 or 2/2 to, maybe update a window that was starting to deteriorate or whatever. Or they might, do something, more elaborate, which in this case, they did. I can kind of speak from my own experience because I know that during the 19th century, my house was owned by 3 generations of builders and carpenters and so on. And yeah, so they did a little bit more than I would have liked, frankly. But, that was an example where they replaced some earlier federal features with more Victorian ones, that kind of somewhat glaringly and shockingly stood out, but that's what they did. So yes, there are, you can almost find examples of almost anything. And this is a kind of an unusual case where, it's a Greek Revival, but it's a Greek Revival style imposed on the guts and bones of a federal period house. You know what I mean? So you have a little bit of an inherent contradiction there. So in many ways, we're kind of taking our best conjectural guesses based on what historical data we can find, what historical precedent. I think Patricia did a great job of finding those comparable houses from that period that show that, I would even suspect that maybe, it could be that particular builder liked that style of window treatment with those little squares in the corners and so on, because that is kind of a non-typical thing. However, there's, several houses that have it, so it's not that untypical. in this area. So anyway, a bit of a little bit more to your question. And I see Ron has his hand up. Ron, did you want to make a comment or
Yes.
question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I did, Glenn. Thanks. I guess where I'll start, I want to talk about the front a little bit. I basically agree with, I guess, with Malcolm. Although I'm glad that the owners have, and I think I heard this correctly, you really would prefer at this point not to have the bay. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That's the way I feel too. And as far as the windows, the number of windows are concerned, I was interested that Glenn just made a reference to the stairway. And that sort of lit a light in my brain, and I said, oh, a stairway. So as you go up the stairs, you have this panoramic view through 3 windows. And I think that's kind of nice. We as a commission don't have anything to do with the interior of the house, but you know, I can see why you would put in 3. It improves the view as you go up the stairs. I like that.
Yeah, actually, it was the architect that said that.
That's right too. That's right too. I'm sorry. So that's my view on this. I'm glad to see that we seem to be heading toward a site visit and some further discussion on some of these points. And you know, I look forward to doing that. But gee, there are a lot of very to me, relatively minor points to be considered here. And I hope we can reach some kind of accommodation that makes all of us happy. But I think the Lynches are to be applauded for taking this on as a project, because this is no easy task. But I think the result, from what I can see, the result is going to be just a beautiful place. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. Any other, I thought, yeah, Patricia, I see your hand.
Yeah, if I can't raise my hand on my main screen, I'm raising it on my phone. Yeah, I agree with what Ron just said, that this would be, you know, restored, all the work and you know, time and effort and whatever they're putting into it. This would be a great example, again, of one of the many houses in Newburyport that was, you know, modernized at some period, but then the features have their own historical significance.
Okay. Did you just cut out, or was that it?
I don't know if I just cut out. I do want to introduce a motion to impose a demo delay so that the rest of the people in the commission can do a site visit and we can talk about, you know, which of these exterior features really would alter the character of the house to remove them, and what things can be preserved and restored appropriately. So I'm going to introduce the motion to impose the demo delay until we can work all that out.
Okay, so there's a motion to impose a demolition delay, so that, and with the expectation that the board will continue to work with the applicant, their architects and attorneys, etc., to and you know, work as expeditiously as practical. I would add, given you know the current restrictions on meetings and so forth, to resolve things expeditiously. Is there a second for that? Someone's got to second it. Well,
this is Joe Morgan. I second that.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, so I'll do the roll call. Just going in the order they're showing up on my screen. Patricia?
Yes.
Okay. Ron?
Yes.
Okay. Malcolm?
Yeah.
Okay. Peter? Not
Yes.
me. Okay. Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Okay, and myself is a yes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 6. Shouldn't there be 7? Who did I miss?
Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Christopher. You wait. Did you drop off my list here? Anyway, are you still with us, Christopher? And Patricia, you still have your hand up. But
oh, sorry, I'm on my phone. I'm
okay.
on 2 different places. Sorry.
Yeah. Actually,
sorry,
you're in the list 3 times.
It's like I'm just sitting in front of my screen yelling, and I can't see the photos and all that. I'm sorry. Let me try to figure out how to lower my hand. Okay. There you
go. Not a problem. Well, we seem to have lost Chris somehow. Fortunately, I'm not sure if he had to drop or what, but we have a quorum nonetheless. We have 6 affirmative votes. So that motion is passed. So there's a few, details to be worked out. Is there, Attorney Mead, would you like to suggest some practical means other than trying to work out everything, in it, well, in this meeting or even in, meetings? Obviously we can have some meetings or conversations and emails and so forth within, open meeting restrictions. We'll deal with those as well. But for example, could you suggest who would be the best point of contact to do things like setting up potential site visits? And I understand, this has been a long time in brewing, so I don't know what kind of timetable the applicant had in mind, but obviously no one likes to drag things out forever, so that's understandable. What would you suggest as far as a practical means of moving forward on this to resolve whatever outstanding issues we might have?
Sure. So I would like to continue so we come in at your next meeting. Mm-hmm. And then I would offer that we could do a site visit on Saturday morning, because what I would like to be able to do is work with the Lynches, taking the feedback that we've received and make revisions to the plans to come in at the next meeting with. So what your next meeting is in, is it
June 11th? June 11th, I believe.
2 weeks. So you would need stuff, and then you're not till June 25th?
Right.
David, are you still on? Do you think you could make plan changes by June, the end of June 5th, the next Friday?
Yes.
Okay, so,
I'd love to do it even earlier if possible. Saturday, I mentioned, it might
No, I'm talking about plan changes. So if we got on your agenda for June 11th and you had a site visit this Saturday morning.
The 30th of May?
Yes. That would be good for us.
Okay. And as far as do you want to, Attorney Mead, do you want to be the kind of if there's questions or things to be coordinated or whatever, do you want to be the point of contact, or is there anyone better suited?
Yeah, I would be the point of contact. Could we say like 9 o'clock on Saturday morning? 8:30, 9 o'clock?
Well,
and I would because of the COVID thing, I would say that we would probably all stay outside.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, why don't we go around the horn? I know 9 o'clock, as far as my current plans, it's okay with me. I'll just do a quick sort of roll call. Ms. Becknick, could you do Saturday morning?
Unfortunately, I will be out of town for the first time since last November. So I'm sorry, but I'm glad I got over there already. It's very interesting house.
All right. How about Peter?
Yes, I can do Saturday morning. Earlier is better. Even earlier than 9 would work.
Okay. How about Joe Morgan?
That's good. I can do that.
You can do early. Okay. Malcolm Conworth can.
Yeah, I can do it. 9 o'clock.
Okay. And Ron, you mentioned interest in a site visit. Can you make it Saturday morning?
Yes.
Okay.
Not fine. Earlier is fine too.
Okay. Okay. Is 8:30 too early? I know a couple people expressed preference to go a little bit earlier.
8:30 is fine.
Okay. All right. Why don't we shoot for 8:30 on Saturday morning, Attorney Mead, and we can take that from there. And what I'll try to do, I'm sure you've been taking notes and listening and all that. Quick question for Andy Report. Andy, do these, I know you're recording these meetings, do they get posted somewhere?
Yeah, there's a little bit of transition that we have to do just because we're catching up with the technology age in government. But we're actually posting the videos as links. We're putting them on a YouTube channel, accessible to the public. And then I've asked our administrative assistant to put the link on the city calendar so folks can conveniently go back to the date of the meeting and see not only the agenda and the materials, but also the video of the meeting that might have happened. So.
Okay, and Attorney Mead, what I'll try to do is I've been taking notes, furiously scribbling here and so forth. I'll try to consolidate what I heard as key things that either need to be considered, reconsidered, talked about, whatever, and send those over to you. So, you know, in case, you know, just you have that input as well. I'm sure probably I won't be saying anything you haven't already heard, but
no, I truly appreciate that. And then I think after Saturday, when we do an iterative draft, maybe I'll get it to you, Mr. Chair, as well. So I would like to have that work together. That would be awesome.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Any like to close this off, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions about the preservation restriction and all that as well. But any last urgent, or, well, doesn't have to be urgent, any last comments or questions about this whole application before we move on to the next item on the agenda? Sounds quiet. Okay, very good then. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Keary and Attorney Mead. Appreciate your presentation. Well prepared as usual, and we'll see we'll see what the future holds. So thanks very much.
And then you would also put us hopefully on your June 11th agenda.
Yes.
Too. Thank you very much.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. I'll make sure that Caitlin and Diane get that on. So you'll be there as well, presumably for the School Street one anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. General business, there's two quick things. One, there's going to be a planning board meeting next week, and they're going to talk about the Institution for Savings Project. I know that's Attorney Mead is involved with that as well, finger in many pies, so to speak. A couple of us will probably be attending. I know that the planning board is interested in the opinions of the Historical Commission. However, we as a commission have not reviewed the revised plans. I'm not sure how many of you have even looked at the newest set of plans. I haven't, to be perfectly honest, I haven't really gone over them yet myself. So the current plan is that if any of us, like myself, or I think Patricia might be planning to go if she's back, we would be speaking as just members of the public, and not speaking on behalf of the board, unless the board wants to specifically authorize us to say something about that particular project. But to be honest, I don't feel comfortable that we're in a position to really do that. Does anyone have an opinion on that? Anyone on the board? Yeah, Ron?
Glenn, I'm planning to attend that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you said what you said, because as you may recall, I think I was the only one who was in favor of that presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be I have seen the revised, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the neighborhood's response to that is.
Okay.
But I will be there.
Okay. All right. So we'll leave it at that. You know, I don't know if the planning board will, ask us to weigh in as a commission or not. They may not. I know the applicant probably isn't particularly interested in that. And I honestly don't know what they will want to do. They may not. The only other general business is the approval of the minutes from the 14th of May. Hopefully you've had a chance to review those. I know I have, and I thought they were fine. Does anyone have a concern or alternatively a motion to approve those minutes?
I'd like to approve the minutes and also adjourn in one motion.
You would, huh? Well, I'm going to exercise my phenomenal cosmic power and disallow the dual motion. We can afford, we can afford the two separate votes, but just because just in case something should come up after the approval of the minutes, not that I think it will, but okay. So there's a motion to approve the minutes. Is that I'll go ahead and second that to save some time. Go quickly around. Malcolm, I'm assuming you're, well, I don't want to assume anything, but you're probably a yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Peter McNamee, approval of minutes.
Yes.
Joe Morgan,
Yes.
Patricia Pecknick,
Yes.
Ron Zemba.
Yes.
Oh, Christopher Fay is back with us. You dropped off there for a little bit, Chris, but you're back.
I did. Yep. Yep. I'm back.
Okay.
Yes. I agree. Yes. I'm a yes.
Okay. Thank you on the approval of minutes. And Joe Morgan, did I get you already?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm yes too. So those are unanimously approved. Thank you, Gretchen, for your services on that. If there is no other urgent business, no other business, urgent or non-urgent, the chair will be happy to hear a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Chair, Richard,
Yes.
if I could interject, this is Andy.
Sure.
I just wanted to make sure things are running as smoothly as possible at every future meeting. I wasn't sure if maybe Patricia could clarify. We noticed that there were sort of 3 instances of her membership in the panelist list. And I wasn't sure if Christopher was having specific problems that we could address going forward, but I just want to make sure that all board members and the public have a good time accessing the meeting.
Yeah, I logged in on my phone as well so that I could look at the drawing, when the screen sharing was there. So I logged in, and then my kids were interested, so they logged in on another device. Sorry about that. Okay. I did not find the hand raising feature on my own Mac. In other words, I couldn't raise my hand on my Mac. I could only raise it on the phone or on the iPad. So that might be something that I did wrong that was glitchy, and if it led to my interrupting people, I'm very sorry about that.
Patricia, this is Ron. If you're using an Apple product, I think the raise your hand thing is a subset of the more button, which is at the top of my page here on my iPad.
Yeah, no, I got it. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Ron. Yeah, thank you, Ron. I figured that out on my phone. Thank you.
Yeah. And Patricia, I'm also using a Mac laptop with granted it's an external screen, but the raise hand feature, took me a while to find it as well. And you wouldn't see it unless you click the button to see the participants, which by default is hidden. Yeah, so you have to click the participants. That opens a panel on the right where you see the participants, and down the bottom of there, it has raise hand, mute me, and so they kind of hide it in there.
Well, feel free to mute me in the future. I think that might be the problem.
Okay, and Chris, do you know why you dropped out, Mr. Fay? Was it just a technical glitch or?
No, I think we've been having internet problems all week. So our internet went out like earlier in the week, and it's really been difficult.
Okay.
So I think it was me. It wasn't you.
Okay. All right, thanks very much. And I know Comcast, I lost internet early in the week too. It was Comcast had an outage that affected, not just me, but maybe you were a victim of the same one. Anyway, I think that was it. I don't think we had the motion to adjourn yet. So, because Mr. Port interrupted that.
Yes,
are you all set, Andy?
I am, thank you. My apologies.
Sure, nope, not a problem. I was just kidding. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Malcolm, I knew you'd pipe up eventually. Okay, if there's a motion to adjourn the meeting, I'll go ahead and second it.
Second.
So Malcolm, are you a yes on that?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Fay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Patricia Pecknick?
Yes.
Okay, Ron Zemba?
Yes.
Okay, Peter McNamee?
Yes.
Joe Morgan?
Yes.
And I think I got everybody. By the way, Ron, do you pronounce your last name just Zemba or Ziemba? Does it matter?
Well, it matters to me, yes.
So what's the correct way? Let me know.
Ziemba.
Ziemba, okay, Ziemba. All right, very good. I will I will use that then. Well, thanks everybody. We are officially adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Port, for doing the honors of coordinating the visual display and the muting and unmuting and all that. Appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
Makes my job much easier to try to run the meeting content itself. And
Sure.
thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
I bid you all good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.